May 5th, 1997, History of the Prophet Joseph Smith. I desire Heavenly Father's Spirit to be with us as we go over a story today that awakens us to how the world truly is the enemy of this priesthood. I need the full time to do it, and anxious for you to listen carefully. In the days of the prophet Joseph, even up till the time in this century, the saints still celebrated what we call Christmas. It was in Uncle Roy's time where the Lord called on this people to stop that practice. Most of you have never done it, and you've been very blessed. But in this time, Joseph Smith had invited some people over on a party on what they called Christmas Day. It says, at 2 o'clock, about 50 couples sat down at my table to dine. Then a large party supped at his house for supper. They spent an evening of music and dance. They had a cheerful and friendly time. And then, while everybody was partying at the prophet's house at the end of December here, suddenly a man with long hair falling over his shoulders, who seemed to be drunk, he came in to Joseph's house. Joseph said he acted like a Missourian. That means he was wild and violent. I requested the captain of the police to put him out of doors. A scuffle ensued, so they started wrestling or pushing around. And I had the opportunity to look this man with the long hair and beard full in the face, when to my great surprise and joy untold, I discovered it was my long-tried, warm, and persecuted friend, Orrin Porter Rockwell. He had been in prison, it says, for over 9 months. Rockwell informed Joseph what he had learned while he was in prison. The sheriff and mobbers in Missouri, in Independence, Missouri, had told Rockwell, "We have somebody close to the prophet who's going to help us capture him." And this was the news Orrin Porter Rockwell brought. Joseph Smith would later identify Sidney Rigdon as the one. And by the next year, he would know William Law, his second counselor, was a traitor. And it was Orrin Porter Rockwell that brought that news. The story I'd like to show you today, or tell you, is how this man was treated while he was in Missouri. I remind you, when Orrin Porter Rockwell was taken by the mobbers, Joseph prophesied he would yet be set free. But Orrin Porter Rockwell suffered so much. And I go through this, hopefully, that you will be so grateful for your blessings. And also to show you, the world out there is not our friend. Even though they butter up to us and try to say how good a people we are and they're our friend. No. The priesthood and the world can never be friends. Real friends. I remind you the map. St. Louis is on the east side of Missouri. Independence is on the west side of Missouri. The Missouri River goes past St. Louis on over to Independence. Orrin Porter Rockwell was going up the Mississippi River to go to Nauvoo when somebody recognized him. Why would people want him? It's because ex-Governor Boggs, the man who used to be governor, somebody tried to shoot him, and he wrote out a paper called an affidavit and said, "I think it was Orrin Porter Rockwell and Joseph Smith." He had no evidence, he just guessed. So Missouri, the people of Missouri wanted to capture Joseph Smith and Orrin Porter Rockwell. Orrin Porter Rockwell was told by the sheriff, Sheriff Reynolds, while Orrin was in jail, that Sheriff Reynolds was going to get Joseph. And that story will be part of this. He knew it was happening. The mobbers didn't keep secret what they were doing. They would tell Orrin Porter Rockwell. They had no right to hold him. They found him guilty of nothing, yet they kept him in jail. trying to find witnesses to find something on him. Orrin Porter Rockwell was on his way from New Jersey to Nauvoo, and in St. Louis, a man named Mr. Fox was told, "That's Orrin Porter Rockwell." And the news had already gone out. Let's capture this man. He was captured. He was put into the St. Louis County Jail for 2 days. He says about midnight he was put on a stagecoach and started for Jefferson City. There were 9 passengers and 2 of them women. He sat in the middle seat, so there must have been a middle seat between the 2 seats. One of the men behind me gouged me in the back. I spoke to him and told him it was dark and I could not see him, but that he was no gentleman. Finally, one of the ladies asked the man to stop, which he did. The next night, the driver was drunk, ran against a tree and broke part of the carriage, the stagecoach. So Orrin Rockwell crawled out, found an extra bolt, but he was ironed, he was shackled. He fixed the stagecoach. Then the driver, who was drunk, ran up against a bank and couldn't move. The stagecoach was stuck. I was asleep at the time, but the bustle awoke me when I told them if they would take off my irons, I would drive. And they wouldn't do it. So he had to get out, iron together, either his wrists or legs or both. And he got up there, took hold of the lines, the passengers got out and helped push, and he whipped the horses. And he guided the stagecoach along until they got to the next town. There was an army officer along with them. He says he started for Independence. Still, this Mr. Fox had him in charge. When they arrived at Independence in Jackson County, the sheriff was named this Sheriff Reynolds, the one who would later go and arrest Joseph Smith. When the sheriff looked in the stagecoach, he thought Orrin Porter Rockwell was the policeman and Mr. Fox was the prisoner, because Mr. Fox looked so bad. He looked guilty. That's what Sheriff Reynolds said. They went there to Independence, and a large crowd of people gathered together. The people wanted to hang him immediately. He's guilty, let's hang him, they said. But he was put in jail 2 or 3 days and went through a trial, so-called trial. The courthouse was crowded. Men had clubs made out of hickory sticks. They told the boys to take their sticks and go and beat him while he was sitting there, right there in the courthouse. Then they brought this Mr. Fox, who swore that he heard Orrin Rockwell say he's been in the county, had not been in the county for 5 years. Orrin Rockwell said, "I have been. I can name the people who could tell you. I have been here." But he was placed in jail. They found nothing against him. They kept searching around for witnesses. They put on the iron hobbles. This jail in Independence had an upper part and a lower part. It says, here it was March, it was still cold, winter time. He describes his living conditions. I had a little dirty straw for a bed, without any bedding, no fire, very cold weather. For 18 days I was not free from shaking with the cold. I got permission to buy 1.5 bushels of charcoal. I kept a little fire. After that, I couldn't have a fire. They brought in men to be his lawyer. Finally, a Mr. Donovan would be his lawyer. After the weather got a little warmer, they furnished me with old newspapers to read. A family lived in the jail where he was. It says the women once in a while would send a little Negro girl with a small basket of victuals or bread. She'd hand it through the grate. He tied a pinhook to a line and would throw it down into some water, trying to get some fish. People would come by just laughing at him. Many people were put in the jail, and they would get free when he was guilty of nothing. Yet they were thieves or whatever. they would be taken out of jail after a time. One man who was accused of printing up money that wasn't from the government, he just made his own money and tried to use it. He was put in jail with saddlebags. In these saddlebags they had fire steels, gun flints, different things that he could saw off his irons. So Orrin Porter Rockwell sawed off the chains, or however he was ironed in his feet and his hands. This other fellow could call for and order a good supper and pay for it. Nobody would bring him a good supper, Orrin Rockwell a good supper. So he was very anxious to escape. It says, nearly dusk, on one certain day, the jailer came in to get the dishes. He sprang to the door, pushed the jailer in, the two prisoners ran out, and they locked the jailer in. He didn't use any violence on the jailer. The law says if a man breaks the lock or performs violence, then he's broken out of jail. But he didn't. He just pushed the jailer in and shut the door. And he walked downstairs. It says, in coming downstairs, we met the jailer's wife. I told her her husband was unharmed. I had only locked him up. We had a board fence to climb over, which was about 12 feet high. I climbed it and ran about 20 rods when he called me to come and help him over, which I did. If I had not helped this other prisoner, I would have escaped. The pure air had so great an effect upon me that I gave out and slowed my pace. When the people heard he escaped, they all started chasing him. And they came up to Orrin Rockwell, who just couldn't run very fast. He was so weakened from being in jail so long. He said, you can catch the other fellow. He can't run very fast. And they did. They brought him to jail. As they came toward the jail with him, Sheriff Reynolds laid his hand on Orrin Rockwell's shoulder. Where's the key? He said, and he told him where he put the key. Then the people went wild. They surrounded Orrin Rockwell. A man named Smallwood Nolan said, let's hang him on the spot. And Sheriff Reynolds pushed Orrin Rockwell right toward the crowd and said, there he is, GDM. Do what you damn please with him. And it says, they stepped up to take a hold of him, and Orrin Rockwell said, I'll mash you in the face, anybody who touches me. And everybody stood back. And he calmly turned around and walked into the jail with nobody touching him. He grabbed hold of some metal and was ready to turn on and knock anybody down with it if they tried to harm him. A rope was passed along through the people to get right up there to Orrin Rockwell as he walked into the jail. The people were still surrounding him. They had a rope ready to lynch him. But he showed that he was ready to fight anyone who would come at him. In a few minutes, nearly everybody walked out of the room. But the sheriff then had him shackled, his right hand to his left foot. Think of that. And he stayed that way for many days, sleeping that way, whatever. The irons, when put on my wrists, were so small they would hardly go on, and swelled them. But in 18 days I could slip them up and turn them around my arm at the elbow. I was fed on cold corn dodger. As far as I know, it's something like cornmeal. I don't know for sure. And meat of the poorest description. If I didn't eat it all up, he said, they'd give it to me the next day as my only food. About a month after the court sat, my irons were taken off. I was so weak that I had to be led to the courtroom by the officer. The only crime they could accuse him of now was breaking out of jail. So he was told he had to go to jail for breaking out of jail when he shouldn't have been in jail. The judge assigned him a lawyer who didn't want to be his lawyer. The lawyer didn't do him any good, really. They said he must be taken to Liberty Jail, the same jail that Joseph had escaped out of. There were men in Jackson County in Independence who promised they were going to kill Orrin Porter Rockwell as he was traveling. And they came to the Missouri River to go north across the river up to Liberty Jail. They saw ahead of them these mobbers going across the ferry and into the woods. They told the man who ran the ferry, "We're going to chop wood and bring it back across the river." But as they came to the river to go across it, a stranger stepped up and said he had heard some men promise they were going to kill a prisoner. And this stranger then stayed right with Orrin Porter Rockwell. He said he heard them say they would go through the woods and capture him in the woods and kill him. So the stranger went across the ferry, the boat, took their horses, and they rode on. And because this stranger was with the sheriff or the guards in Orrin Porter Rockwell, these other mobbers who were going to jump out of the woods and kill Orrin Porter Rockwell, they stopped when they saw the stranger. So the Lord blessed Orrin Porter Rockwell. They heard voices in the woods. They couldn't hear any chopping of wood. He got up to Liberty. It says he stayed in Liberty Jail for 10 days, and because supposedly the papers weren't right that arrested him, he was sent back to Independence Jail. When I was put in Independence Jail, I was again ironed hand and foot and put in the dungeon. And he stayed hand and foot attached for 2 months. During this time, the sheriff told me he was going to arrest Joseph Smith. He had received letters from Nauvoo which satisfied him that Joseph Smith had unlimited confidence in me. And he said to Orrin Porter Rockwell, "If you make it so we can capture Joseph, the people of this county will pay you any price you want. You'll be a rich man the rest of your life. You'll never want for anything. If you'll just turn against Joseph, because he has complete confidence in you." That was Sheriff Reynolds talking. Orrin Porter Rockwell looked at him and said, "I will see you all damned first, and then I won't. Then I won't turn traitor, even after they're damned." In other words, he wasn't going to turn traitor against the prophets. About the time that Joseph was arrested by Reynolds at Dixon, I knew they were after him. He says, there was no way I could inform Joseph. And his body just started to twitch, he says. He was just so bothered and sad and didn't know what to do. He says, I could not help it. He was so anxious to help Joseph Smith, yet he was chained in this prison. But one day, a dove came in the window. He watched it. As he watched it go in through one window toward the iron bars and so forth, and then it went out and never came again, a feeling of peace came over him, and he felt like they would not be able to take Joseph into Missouri, or bring him into Missouri. And he found out about that time is when Joseph was released. A few days later, Sheriff Reynolds came to the jail and said he had failed arresting Joseph. They spent 2 months trying to make out the right documents to have him arrested and bring in witnesses. It says, finally, his mother came to see him, and she brought $100, which would greatly help him. It would pay his lawyer in the first place, help him take care of some of his needs. The trial was delayed. Each time he'd go to the judge, they say, let's put it off longer, let's put it off longer. So he decided an attempt to escape. He was put down in the dungeon, or the lower floor. I was handcuffed in the dungeon, which is in the basement story of the prison, about 9 feet high. I took down the stovepipe, pushed my clothes up through the stovepipe hole, crawled through the hole in the floor, which was made of logs about 14 inches thick, into the upper room. The hole was so small that it scratched my flesh and made me bleed from many wounds. I looked at the inside door, and with the bail of the water pail I unbolted it, but finding I could not get through the outside door, I returned to my dungeon in the same narrow path. So I went down through the stovepipe hole, through the floor joists 14 inches thick. The following night I made another attempt through the same way, but failing to get through the outside door, I lay down on the upper floor, where the boys found me the next morning when they brought me my food. They made an alarm when 5 or 6 men came and again took me down to the dungeon. And there was another great excitement. The people wanted to lynch him or kill him. They wouldn't give him wood or anything to build a fire. It would be December before he would actually escape. And so into the winter months, he lived in the cold, until finally there was a young boy who saw, a 6-year-old boy, who saw this man in prison. Porter Rockwell's own lawyer, Mr. Donovan, told the boy to get out of there. The boy cursed the lawyer and said, "I'm going to help this prisoner no matter what you say." And he was just 6 years old. And he brought every day from then on little pieces of wood for Orrin Porter Rockwell to have a fire. They said they'd have a certain session of court on a certain day. They had sent word to Nauvoo to bring in their witnesses. No way would the Mormons come to Missouri, because that was just a trick to put them in jail. He was tried for breaking jail, again assigned to stay there in jail. It says on December 13th, suddenly one night, General Donovan took me out and told me I must take off across the country on foot and not walk on any traveled road unless it was during the night. For some reason, this man named Donovan just came in and released him. Said, "You're escaping, go." He started, accompanied by his mother. They went to the house of a widow, where he had obtained his first supper in freedom in more than 9 months. He went through the woods to the road, where he heard 2 men riding on horseback. One man said, "He has not been gone many minutes. We'll soon overtake him." They were out to kill him. So he was released, but the mob intended to kill him. I went round the houses and traveled in the fields by the side of the road. The moon was in its first quarter, and I traveled during the night about 25 miles. I carried a little food with me, and next day traveled on the road, and walked to a man's house named Mr. Taylor, and all the skin was off my feet. I assume he had no shoes. A neighbor offered to take me in for the night if I would go back 2 miles. I did so. Found his wife very angry with her husband, who said, "Stranger," the man said, "you see my wife is very cross. I have got some whiskey. Let's drink. My wife will soon have something to eat." So he ignored his wife. They had a drink. They ate supper, and then his wife was sweet. I stayed in peace through the night, and the next morning I ate breakfast with them and gave them 50 cents. The man brought out a horse and sent a little boy with me 14 miles, which was a great relief to my weary feet. The next night I stopped near where the Hans Mill massacre took place. The third day I walked till noon, and then hired a man to carry me the remainder of the day for 75 cents. When it says carried him, that means put him on a horse or in a wagon. Stayed at a house where I was well acquainted, but the people did not recognize me. I did not make myself known. Paid 50 cents for supper, lodging, and breakfast, being sent 12 miles on horseback the next morning. The next day went 30 miles, where I rested 3 days to help his feet get better. I was carried 25 miles on horseback and walked the same day 25 miles. The next day walked 40 miles, hired a man to carry him to Montrose, which was just across the river from Nauvoo, to which place I was 3 days in going. I crossed the river to Nauvoo in a small boat and came straight to Joseph's house. The same day, a man named Daniel Avery, who was kidnapped by the Missourians, was also released. So imagine the treatment, the suffering of this man, a good and dear friend to the prophet Joseph. So young people, the world isn't our friend. If they could, they would destroy us, but the Lord has softened the hearts of some people, blinded the eyes of the world from even seeing what we're doing, until the army of Zion can become very great. The prophet Joseph could have led this people along to the redemption of Zion, but the people would not obey. Yet he had a few trusted friends like Orrin Rockwell, or Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, John Taylor, Willard Richards. Those good men would help protect him. Joseph Smith promised he would never go back to Missouri, and he did not, at least in this mortal life. I'll leave the other stories for the next sessions. This completes the year of 1843. Teachers, on whatever time you want, you can do quizzing of that year if you have not done it. We're starting into 1844, such an eventful year, many stories. And that was the year Joseph was killed.